In September, two War College professors wrote an op-ed in City Journal that said, quote, "War colleges no longer teach war fighting." This is consistent, unfortunately, with cautions I've heard from field grade officers and War College students who warn that war colleges care more about academic accreditation and growing junior foreign policy wonks than about building war-winning leaders. These students have expressed their frustrations and fear that we're in danger of ceding what they called intellectual overmatch to Russia and China. I would note that it appears the Joint Staff seems to agree. They released a memo 18 months ago that called for renewed War College focus on lethality. These two professors, though, claim that this guidance has since been, quote, "lost in a maze of bureaucracy." Could you talk to me, Admiral, about your plans to implement the findings of that memo?
Certainly. Thank you, and thanks for the discussion a couple of weeks ago. First, I'm a big fan of joint professional military education. And for me, and my experience at National War College and my interactions with the Naval War College as an example, the key for JPME is to go beyond the tactical to the operational and the strategic. I think that's where we need to center our war colleges going forward. There is an element of policy, but how does the military fit within the policy pieces of the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic? But the real power of the war colleges and JPME writ large is to ensure that we bridge that gap from the tactical to the strategic. So if confirmed and going forward, I would look forward to working with the services to discuss that to ensure that there's the appropriate focus on war fighting and lethality.
Thank you. Could I get your commitment to follow up on a progress report on that by May?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. You know, when I first ran for office, I guess it's almost 10 years ago now, a nice elderly lady asked me if I was the one who had gotten out of the Army not too long ago. And I said yes, and I was running for Congress now, and I said yes. And she said, "Why would you leave the country's most respected institution for the country's least respected institution?" I wish that wasn't the case about Congress, but I've always been proud that it is the case about our military. Therefore, I viewed with alarm the annual Reagan National Defense Survey, which recently found a staggering 25% collapse in American trust in the military. And in the past 11 months, my office has fielded hundreds of concerns from service members across the services who say they believe that senior DoD leadership has been politicized in inappropriate and unprofessional ways. Their complaints include, and these are their words, not mine, one, counter-extremism training that draws blanket condemnation of troops who privately hold conservative views. Two, training to fight things like the weather rather than China's growing military. And three, so-called diversity training that has taken on blatantly political, even racist tones, including forcing service members to segregate themselves by race or promoting based on skin color, sexual orientation, and gender rather than operational excellence and achievement. Do you think it's fair to say that some of these policies, which are quite controversial, have contributed to that 25% decline in trust in our military?
Sir, I too am disappointed and alarmed by that number. I read the same report that you did, and that's concerning to me as someone who's dedicated 37 years to this and take great pride in what we're able to do. I think the key issue here is what you expect of us, and that is that you expect us to remain apolitical and to provide our best military advice. I think that's the key issue, and everything we do needs to be revolved around that central concept.
Well, Admiral, what we've consistently heard from many of those service members who have reached out to us is that they feel they are being presented with highly politicized training modules. They voice their concerns or objections, and then their chain of command will accuse them of acting in a political fashion. So they find themselves in a catch-22. Let me give you just one example of something that seems a bit strange to me. Marine Base Quantico recently posted a job listing for a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer for a salary of $144,000 a year, more than triple the median household income in Arkansas. Also close to what a base commander makes. I mean, do you think that we should be paying $144,000 to a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer at Quantico? Is this the kind of thing that might cause Americans to lose confidence in the priorities of DoD leadership?
Don't have the context for in which that billet was advertised. I do think we need to have important discussions about things like that. To the pay scale, I really can't comment on what that job is being asked to do. But again, I think the idea that you need from us is to be apolitical. And I want to go back to something you mentioned in your preamble deck, sir, if I could, and that was that the concern on the part of the members who have communicated with you that they could not voice their views. I think the role of commanders is to create that open dialogue and have that ability to discuss things, and that there should be no reprisals for that kind of thing. And so going forward, we need to make sure we have that environment, the safe environment where people can have that open dialogue and that discussion.
Yeah, my time's expired. I will just say that what we expect of you and all of the senior military leaders is to address these cultural challenges. We also have spoken before the hearing about my concerns on the surface Navy and its cultural challenge in the report that I released with Congressman Gallagher and a few other Navy veterans. We can write laws in this institution, we can pass budgets, but no organization can thrive and make real change without dynamic leadership. That's why they always said leadership was the most important element of combat power. So we're counting on you and other senior leaders to help address some of these cultural challenges and hopefully win back the quarter of the American people who said they've lost trust in our military. And that's what I expect to see, and that's what we'll be monitoring in the years ahead.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reemphasize the line of questioning that Senator Kane began with, and that is nuclear command and control. We always talk about the triad. I think it's a quad without the modernization of nuclear command and control, and not only modernization, but ongoing modernization, because the cyber threat is constantly evolving. Without that modernization, the rest of the triad could be rendered useless and therefore not credible and therefore not a deterrent. So I hope you will focus very intensely on the upgrades necessary to command and control systems. I think you've said that that is your intention, but please reiterate it for me.
Yes, Senator, absolutely. What we see in the cyber domain across all of our weapon systems has to be addressed. And so we talk a lot about being able to defend our networks. The ultimate network to defend is the NC3 network, and we're going to have to be able to do that in cyber. So if confirmed, it would be a high priority of mine to continue the momentum started to do that.
Thank you. I just returned this morning from the Norwegian Embassy on a conference on the Arctic. And one of the issues that came up was the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. In 2007, the Russians, there's a famous picture of the Russians planting a Russian flag at the North Pole under the Arctic Ocean. And to me, it symbolizes our failure to be at the table when we're resolving disputes with regard to the maritime domain. Is it your professional military opinion that it would be in the national interest of this country to accede to the Law of the Sea Treaty?
It is, Senator.
Thank you. And I hope the record will show how readily you answered that question. I didn't have to pry it out of you. I think it's very important, and I think it's something we should bring up before this body once again, because our national security is being compromised, whether it's the South China Sea or the Arctic or other areas in the maritime area. Now, one of your roles will be as the chair of the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, the JROC. And again, recently I was at a dinner with some prominent figures in the technology field, and they pointed out that because of the length of time it takes to develop our weapon systems, they are literally obsolete the day they go into service. In some cases, they're years out of date. I know that we're always focused in the procurement area on money and on cost, but talk to me about the importance of time. If the technology is advancing so fast today that if it takes a dozen years to develop a new airframe or a new maritime, a new ship or a new weapon system, we're sunk. Not to use the naval term, but time has to be an essential part of this process.
Absolutely, sir. I'll just use a Navy term, speed to the fleet. You don't, as you say, you don't want to take forever to get it to the sailor. So I think there's several things that we need to do. First, although I would offer to you is if confirmed, speed will be and urgency will be part of the JROC process. And in this, I believe I'm building on the great momentum that General Hyten and General Selva set for the JROC. I think one of the challenges, though, is that we're risk averse. And so that we need to consider whether and adopt a strategy, if you will, that will allow test a little and learn a lot. And if there's failure there, then we can.
In briefings that I've been in, one of the reasons given for the speed with which the Chinese have achieved what they have in hypersonics is that they're willing to fail. They're willing to run tests and learn from failure. And we seem to be, as you say, risk averse and therefore much slower in our development process.
I would agree with you. That risk aversion, I think, was born of a period of time, perhaps in the late 90s, early 90s, when we didn't have any peer competitors. That's not the case now. So we have to be able to fail to learn faster. Failure doesn't mean malfeasance or laziness or any of that, but it means iterating and going faster.
One other area I want to hope you will emphasize is that I think, frankly, we've been slow on is directed energy. We have a very expensive missile defense infrastructure that's designed to hit a bullet with a bullet, and those bullets cost tens of millions of dollars. Do you believe that directed energy is a promising technology that should be pursued more aggressively?
I do, Senator. As you correctly point out, that's a terrible exchange ratio for us. And if we can get to the point where a drop of fuel means a bullet, that's where we need to be. So pursuit, if confirmed, pursuit of directed energy and some of the other technologies that we've talked about now would be high on my list. But that directed energy then would be folded into an integrated network of capabilities that we can bring to the fight.
But it's not going to happen unless somebody pushes it, and I hope that you'll be that person.
Aye, sir.
Thank you very much, Admiral.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Grady. We appreciate your time. I appreciated your phone call before Thanksgiving.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're grateful for your service. I want to talk with you a little bit about the role of the Vice Chairman within the Nuclear Posture Review. And in the past, the Joint Staff served in co-leadership roles with the SecDef. And presumably, this was the way that it ensured the best military insight, intel insight, and advice available to make certain that that was a part of the analysis. And in this year's SASC NDAA, we included a codification of that practice for the Biden administration's first NPR. And of course, we're trying to push that on across the finish line at this point. So, is the Vice Chairman a co-chair of the administration's ongoing NPR?
The Vice Chairman is an advisor to that process now.
Okay. And according to a Pentagon press briefing that occurred last month, the DOD will conclude its NPR early next year. Is that accurate?
I believe so.
Okay. And if confirmed, do you believe that you will have adequate time to contribute to the NPR?
If confirmed, I believe I will have an opportunity to help shape the NPR going forward. I've had a little bit of that opportunity as the commander of the Naval Forces piece, but I look forward to being part of that process going forward.
Do you think that we should change the pace and the time of the NPR and do it more frequently?
I think it should be conditions-based. I think the timing and tempo of many of the policy reviews seems adequate to me right now. However, the world gets a vote in those kind of things, and I suspect that should there be large-scale changes in the international security environment, we would then go back and look at the seminal documents that we have that guide our thinking.
And do you think the aggressiveness of China in this field, the work that they are doing in hypersonics, the aggressiveness of Russia, would mean that we would need to change time and tempo.
It could. I think that as the two peer competitors, particularly in the nuclear space, that we have to spend a lot of time focusing on their intentions and what they're doing going forward. And certainly deterrence, as an example, with two nuclear competitors is different than that with one, which is why the current NPR that is coming forward is such an important document, and I think well-timed based on what we're seeing with China.
Well, I do think that it is. And when we talk about terms like no first use and sole purpose, that enters into that. And it is of concern that our nuclear capabilities are at their lowest since the early 60s, when we first began fielding a triad, and all of the systems that comprise our nuclear forces are decades past their intended design lives, and we are currently the only nuclear-armed country without the capability to produce a single new nuclear weapon. So do you believe the current program of record is sufficient to support the full modernization of our nuclear infrastructure?
I do, and I thank the committee's support for that as we work our way forward through modernizing the nuclear triad and all of the associated infrastructure that goes with it. So I thank you for your support on that. And
well, talking about that associated infrastructure, what are your concerns with respect to DOD, but then also respect to NNSA and their capabilities?
And NSA are fantastic partners within the DOE with the Department of Defense. They're kind of our battle buddies in this effort to modernize our nuclear triad. And so ensuring that we work closely together, that we're integrated in as we move forward to ensure that the infrastructure that supports that nuclear triad keeps pace. That will be, if confirmed, will be an important relationship that I would hope to seek with NNSA and with the larger nuclear enterprise.
I have a couple of more questions for you on this, on infrastructure and recapitalization, modernization, but in the interest of time, I will submit those to you for written answers.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Grady, for being here today. Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
So in August, a U.S. drone strike killed 10 Afghan civilians, including 7 children and 1 employee of a U.S.-based NGO, after water containers were mistaken for potential explosives. Just a few weeks ago, you probably saw, the New York Times revealed that in 2019, the military covered up an airstrike that killed approximately 70 women and children in Syria and was flagged as a potential war crime. Unfortunately, these are far from isolated instances. Independent watchdog groups estimate that in the past 20 years, U.S. air and drone strikes have killed thousands of innocent civilians in places like Yemen, Syria, and Somalia. And the true toll may never be known because of the difficulty of accurate reporting and the military's consistent underreporting. So let me just start with kind of a baseline here, Admiral. Would you agree that the rates of civilian casualties are unacceptably high?
Senator, I would agree that civilian casualties under any circumstances are totally unacceptable and that you should demand from us better.
I appreciate that answer very much, Admiral. You know, but here's the thing. Despite this terrible loss of innocent life, no meaningful reform or change has been implemented. For years, DOD has turned a blind eye to civilian casualties and has also failed to distribute ex gratia money that Congress has authorized for survivors. This is just wrong. And I don't know how we can continue to view a system that kills thousands of innocent civilians and simply accept it as a cost of doing business. Any system that does that, in my view, is fundamentally broken. Now, the New York Times also reported that DOD investigates reports of civilian casualties only when, and this is the quote, there is a potential for high media attention or concern with outcry from the local community or government. So let me ask you this, Admiral. Would you also agree that DoD investigating only high-profile or potentially newsworthy cases of civilian casualties is a barrier to meaningful accountability?
I think the issue that you raise on accountability is one that you should hold us to the highest standard for. Yeah, I'll give you my personal experience in that. As a strike group commander for 10 months in the Arabian Gulf, we dropped 1 million pounds of bombs. I had to explain every single one of those and whether they met ground commander's intent. That level of accountability is something that you should demand from us.
And do you believe, based on that, that reform is needed to reduce the rates of civilian casualties caused by U.S. military operations?
I think every civilian casualty is a tragedy, but it's very dangerous and hard work that we do, and we apply lessons learned each time to try to get better to forestall that. But again, hold us accountable and we'll fix it.
Well, I appreciate that, Admiral, because that is the point. We need to get better on this, and it is about accountability. I've already asked this committee to investigate operations that result in civilian casualties and to suggest reforms that can prevent these tragedies. But you don't have to wait for us to act. The Pentagon has an opportunity to do exactly that without a specific mandate from Congress. So it can and should start that today. And I look forward to working with you on this. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Grady, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your nomination. I want to talk a little bit about European posture with the circumstances in Ukraine or with Russia near Ukraine right now. It seems like we've got a hot spot there and a real clear and present threat. I know that we've worked on improving our European posture since the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in 2014, and I think we've got more work to do. We have the multi-domain task force in Germany, and I think we're reestablishing B Corps over in Poland. But what more do we need to do in terms of pushing resources in that region that seems to be continually under threat? And kind of curious about your anti-access aerial denial. What other priorities should we place there? And I guess in answering that question, we've got priorities in other points of the globe. So, you know, how are you going to balance scarce resources? What would be your priorities when you're confirmed, and with respect to European posture, but also other threats that are equally concerning?
Yeah, the challenges in the European area of operations are significant, as you've pointed out, sir. And so I think the first thing we need to think about is working with our allies and partners there and leveraging the great strength that is the NATO alliance. We're certainly stronger together in that regard. The resource challenge that you discuss is strong, significant. Certainly the pacing threat is in China, and we need to then balance how we're going to address our presence and posture in Indo-PACOM and the challenges there with how we're going to balance those in Europe. So again, I think the key here will be a threat-based and resource-informed discussion, but then leveraging the flexibility and maneuvering that we have as a military to leave us options to move quickly where we need to be. And I think a big part of that is working with our allies and partners. You asked me a question about A2AD. These challenges are significant. We could talk for a long time, I suppose, at a higher classification level in the Western Pacific, as an example. But to your point, in Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean is also a very challenging area to work, as is the Strait of Hormuz. And so, as the Vice Chairman and working within the JROC, it'll be a priority of mine to bring those and close those A2AD gaps and bring those capabilities to the force as quickly as possible in all of the AORs around the country. The East Med is an example to your question about EUCOM.
I want to talk a little bit about NATO. NATO 2030, there's some promise in there. They seem to reference China as a threat that our NATO allies and partners should take seriously. But what is your sense of NATO working with them? I get the sense, I have the pleasure of serving as co-chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group, and the sense that I get is that we still do not have a complete consensus among some of our NATO allies with respect to the threat of Russia. What can you tell me that would give me optimism that there is a growing sense of resolve that we all need to act and recognize the threat?
In my dealings with my NATO partners, and I'll go back to my time as the Sixth Fleet Commander when I was Strike Force NATO, I thought there was a growing realization, particularly of the Russian threat and the challenges that we would need to meet as a NATO alliance and the strength of the transatlantic alliance that would be important to that. And to your question about a growing understanding of China and the threats that posed, I similarly felt the same. And so my dialogues at my level, and have confirmed going forward with the Vice Chairman of the UK and France in particular, will be to talk about what China is doing in their part of the world. Certainly, if you look at the One Belt, One Road initiative and challenges in Europe, or if you look at the 5G and Huawei and how that challenges what we want to do with our allies and partners, that growing realization is there, and I'm pretty confident that we can work together to meet those challenges.
Thank you. I have some other questions I'll submit for the record, but thank you. I look forward to supporting your nomination.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. We are approaching a vote at 11:30, so I'd ask my colleagues to adhere to the 5-minute limit as much as possible. Senator Romero, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Grady, normally I start each nomination hearing with a series of questions related to a nominee's fitness for service. However, based on the severity of the ongoing water contamination crisis at Pearl Harbor, I'm going to submit those questions for the record. I'm not sure how familiar you or my colleagues are with the Red Hill Fuel Storage Facility, but it is a huge complex that I liken to the Hoover Dam. Red Hill has 20 massive underground fuel storage tanks built into the side of a mountain that holds 250 million gallons of fuel to support military operations across the Indo-Pacific. These tanks serve as a strategic war reserve in the event of crisis. Red Hill sits 100 feet directly above Oahu's aquifer, which is the source of drinking water for all of Honolulu and the surrounding area, threatening the safety of our clean drinking water. While there have been ongoing issues with leaks at Red Hill since 2014, a series of recent preventable accidents have led to the contamination of the Navy's water system and put the community at risk. At this moment, around 100,000 military service members, their families, contractors, and other residents are impacted. Over 2,800 families have been displaced to temporary housing only weeks before the holidays, and thousands of others are being forced to use bottled water. This is not just a short-term matter to resolve the drinking water problem, which the Navy must do expeditiously, but also a long-term question about the department's plans for strategic fuel storage. On Monday, I joined Governor Ige and the Hawaii delegation in calling for the Navy to immediately suspend operations at Red Hill, while they confront and remedy this crisis. Governor Ige then directed the Navy to cease operations at Red Hill and defuel all the tanks. The Department of Defense needs to provide answers to the citizens of Hawaii and the nation as a whole about how it can safely protect the aquifer while still storing the required fuel reserve for national security, even if that means ultimately moving the fuel elsewhere. In the past week, I have spoken with the Secretary of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, and the Commander of Indo-PACOM multiple times about how to resolve this crisis. It is paramount that the Navy understands that Oahu needs safe drinking water. That is the top priority, and I will continue to work with the congressional delegation and the governor to do whatever is necessary to make that happen. Admiral, once confirmed, I'd like a commitment from you that Red Hill will be a top priority, both solving the short-term contamination issue and developing a credible long-term plan for the storage or for the strategic war reserve needs. I would also like your commitment to prioritize restoring the community's confidence in the military. You can imagine the community's confidence has been badly shaken by how the military has handled this water contamination crisis. Indo-PACOM is our country's priority theater, and DoD's budgeting and infrastructure decisions need to more strongly reflect that reality. Admiral, can I get your commitment that if confirmed that you will make Red Hill now and going forward a priority, a top priority?
Yes, ma'am. The safety of our citizens, our Navy families, our military families is of the highest importance. And you have my commitment that if confirmed, I will work with my very close colleague, Chris Aquilino and Sam Paparo, to ensure that we move forward appropriately, both first and primarily on the safety of our citizens, but then on the logistics implications going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rona. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral, good to see you again. I appreciated our meeting, and I look forward to supporting your confirmation quickly. Let me just begin. Why do you think the White House left this seat open? My understanding is they had names back in January for the American people. I'm quite concerned. We don't have a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We have all these challenges that we're facing as a nation. Russia is looking like it's possibly going to invade Ukraine. Xi Jinping is very aggressive towards Taiwan, and we don't even have a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Why do you think it took so long to put your name up before this committee?
Sure, I'm not privy to the process by which the nomination worked its way through the process. I'll just say I'm happy to be sitting here now, and if confirmed, look forward to working with you.
Well, I think it's part of a broader trend, a dereliction of duty trend as it relates to the military and this White House, this president. They don't seem to prioritize the military. The vice chairman position's open right now. That didn't have to happen. Unforced error doesn't certainly help our national security. And I've been raising this issue a lot. The president's budget does double-digit increases in terms of almost every federal agency, with the exception of two. Two get cuts, significant cuts if you keep it for inflation-adjusted cuts. The Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security. Dead last. Again, there's not a prioritization of the military. What do you think that Xi Jinping or Putin see when they see a budget requests like this from this president's White House? You think that that gives them encouragement that we're cutting our defense spending?
I think that as we look at their budgets, they look at ours, and they try and attempt to draw conclusions from that on our way forward.
In your personal opinion, do you think at this moment in time, cutting our defense budget is a good idea for national security or a bad idea, in your personal opinion?
I think that there are many significant national security challenges around the world, and that you need a Department of Defense budget that was able to meet those challenges, not just now, but going forward.
Does cutting the department's budget do that?
I think
in your personal opinion?
Yeah, there are risks and challenges there that that we need to face, and that we need to have the appropriate funding level to do that.
You're not answering my question with respect. Do you think that cutting the defense budget does that? I mean, just a yes or no. Personal opinion.
I think that stable and predictable and adequate funding is important, and that it needs to keep pace with the threat and inflation.
This doesn't, does it?
This is challenging.
This doesn't. Let me just be more specific. This budget and the request from the Navy actually shrinks the fleet. Commissions 4 new ships, retires 8. Do you think shrinking the U.S. Navy fleet is something that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party would welcome or would be against? The U.S. Navy fleet shrinking, which is what this budget by this president does. You think? What do you think the Chinese think of that?
I think the Chinese look at an isolated shrinking of the budget as a positive thing.
Yes, I do too. Well, fortunately, this committee rebuked the president and others, and we put forward what the National Security Commission, bipartisan, by the way, recommended to increase defense spending 3 to 5% per year, real budget, a real increase, inflation adjusted. That's what this committee responsibly did, and we certainly hope that as we look forward to appropriating that we'll do that. Let me ask one final question, then I'll have a number for you that I'm going to submit for the record. There has been a dramatic, and you and I talked about this, trust in the military in terms of a decline, actually plummeting. The Reagan National Defense Survey says that for the first time ever, a minority of Americans, only 45%, report having a great deal of trust and confidence in the military. This is down from 70% in 2018, 3-year drop. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, first, I'm disappointed to see that number.
So am I.
Someone who's served for 37 years, take great pride in what I do and what our servicemen do every day. That's disturbing. I think the key for us to help combat that is to be as transparent in what we do and as apolitical as we possibly can be.
Let me ask one final question. The Undersecretary of Defense, number three position in the Pentagon, he said one of his priorities in his confirmation hearing was to, quote, stamp out systemic racism within the ranks. Do you think the military is a systemically racist institution in your experience? And do you think that having senior officials say that kind of thing is actually one of the things that undermines trust?
I think it's really important that we have discussions about anything that challenges the safe and secure working environment for our force. That's a commander's business to do that, and racism is part of that. I'll give you my personal experience. Personal experience. Every time I do a fleet unit visit, whether it's an airplane, a squadron, or a submarine, I ask these questions. And we'd work really hard to have that dialogue, that important dialogue that we need to have about racism. And we all agree that there is no place for it in our military.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll submit more records or questions for the record.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Admiral, and congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for being here today and offering some of your thoughts. Admiral, in advanced testimony, you expressed concern with both state and non-state actors' ability to successfully execute large-scale influence operations against the United States and its partners, and certainly I share those concerns, and we have a lot of evidence of that on a almost daily basis. So I want to kind of hear your views on organizing our information warfare capabilities. This is a wide-scoping issue, I understand, but information clearly is a domain and a warfighting function with a very strong human dimension to it as well. But we should never exceed the need for some overarching guidance, planning, and authorities when it comes to all this. So my question to you is, would the joint force be more effective and by extension perhaps more resilient if information warfare fell under a single entity such as a functional component command?
Yeah. First, I agree with you, sir, on the challenge that information warfare presents to us in the modern realities of warfare going forward. And winning and dominating in the information space is going to be just as important as in the military or the diplomatic or the lawfare or the economic. And so going forward, we're going to have to do and work very hard to ensure that happens. I think the best response from an information perspective, though, is that, to answer your question directly, is that it should be integrated across what all of our, we'll use the COCOMs as an example, it has to be integrated in everything they do from the ground up. It can't be something that's bolted on the bottom. My discussions with my colleagues who are fleet commanders or who are combatant commanders now, I think they get that. And so I think as the vice chairman, if confirmed, it would be my job to help encourage that integration baked in from the bottom as equally as important as what we do from the tactical to the strategic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we look at malign influence in information warfare, there's certainly vulnerabilities in governance, and that can turn some of our neighbors and our allies into targets of opportunity for financially motivated cyber criminals. State-sponsored actors, certainly linked to China, to Russia, and Iran, are conducting extensive cyber espionage operations, information operations. So my question for you is, do you believe that security assistance should include cybersecurity assistance to help our partners protect their critical infrastructure or to enhance their resiliency against this sophisticated information warfare that we're seeing across the globe?
Yes, Senator. First, you are stronger together with our allies and partners, one of those great competitive advantages that we have. And so in the cyber realm, then, working together within cyber to meet those threats that you have pointed out is incredibly important. And so I do think that there are venues for us to help and to learn from them as well in the cyber domain going forward.
Great. Well, thank you. Discussion of great power competition tends to emphasize capabilities and resources that prepare for potentially armed conflict. But I would like you to address a little bit how we would employ our military instrument of power against a broad spectrum of non-military threats. We've already talked about cyber and information warfare. But I believe that irregular warfare architecture represents perhaps a proactive shaping process through competition and generates some options if tensions escalate or if deterrence fails. So my question for you is, how should the joint force be competing actively in this environment while deterring escalation and shaping theaters in a way that will help us should deterrence fail?
So I think there's several elements to that. One, working with our allies and partners is absolutely critical. So that's one. Two, there's a value to being there and to being able to work with them as situations arise. Things like theater security cooperation, which allows us to train together, to exercise together. Things like the IMET program that allow us to share best practices and democratic values are important. And then to your point about boots on the ground, perhaps I'll use the Seabees as an example. They do fantastic work around the world, helping share those cultural values and help us learn about the battle space that we're going to operate in. And then at the higher end, irregular warfare, whether it be SOF or something else, is absolutely critical to everything we do. And it's across all phases, from pre-conflict to post-conflict.
Well, very good. And when I served in the Navy Reserve, I served in a Seabee battalion, so I appreciate you bringing up the Seabees.
Sure.
Thank you again for your answers, Admiral.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.